The first winter I drove a plow out here, an older guy named Merle told me the only thing you really needed to know was that a road is not a place. He said it like he was warning me about a bad habit. I was 26, fresh off 2 seasons on a gravel crew, and I thought he meant it the way old men mean most things, which is somewhere between practical and superstitious, with the practical part on top so you don't argue. A road is not a place, he said. It's a line we agree to keep open. When the weather stops agreeing, you're not driving on a road anymore. You're driving on what you remember of one. I didn't think about that again for almost 6 years. Then one night in February, on a county route I'd plowed maybe 200 times, I saw a road that wasn't there, and I've been thinking about what Merle said ever since. I should explain the work first, because most of what bothers me only makes sense if you understand how ordinary the rest of it is. I drive for a small county outfit in the eastern part of the state, in flat farm country, where the wind has nothing to break it for 50 miles in any direction. We run 2 trucks on the night shifts during heavy weather, sometimes 3 if the state crews can spare a hand. The routes are long and unglamorous. You leave the yard around 10 or 11 at night with a thermos, a route sheet, a radio, a sack of sand for your own tires if you slide off, and a heater that works about as well as any heater built before I was born. You drive a loop that takes anywhere from 4 to 7 hours, depending on the snow. You clear, you check markers, you call in if a section is drifted shut, and you do it again. By morning, your shoulders feel like wood, and your eyes feel like they've been rubbed with a wool sock. But the roads are open, and the ranchers and the school buses and the home health nurses can move, and that's the job. In a real storm, the cab becomes the entire world. The headlights only show you maybe 20, 30 feet of blowing white, and even that's mostly useless because the snow is moving sideways across the beam. So what you actually navigate by is the reflective markers on the shoulders, little metal posts with a strip of orange or yellow tape set every few hundred feet. In good weather, you barely notice them. In a whiteout, they're the only proof the road exists. You learn to read them like Morse code. 1 marker means you're still on the line. 2 markers in a row, close together, means a curve. A missing marker means you slow down and trust the feel of the blade against the shoulder until the next one shows up. That's the rhythm of it. Marker, marker, marker. Wind, engine. The sound of the blade scraping. The radio crackling once an hour with someone checking that you're still alive. The first time I saw the road, it was 3 in the morning on a Tuesday in early February, and I'd been pushing through a storm that the forecast had called moderate, and that was, in the way forecasts have, considerably worse than that. Visibility was down to maybe 15 feet. I was on the long east-west stretch between 2 of our standard turnaround points, a section we just called the middle leg, and I was running the blade slow because the drifts were starting to come over the top of the snow fences. I was watching for the next marker on the right when I saw, in the corner of the headlight wash, an opening in the field on the north side of the road. Now, openings on that stretch are not unusual. There are field accesses every quarter mile or so, gates the farmers use to get equipment in and out. Most of them are blocked off in winter and look like nothing more than a gap in the fence line buried under drifts. This was different. This was a clean opening, wide enough for a truck, with a shoulder line on either side that had been plowed recently. The snow at the entrance was banked the way our blades bank it, in that long, even curl you only get from a county truck or a state truck. The surface past the entrance was smooth and dark, the way a road looks right after a fresh pass, when the wind hasn't had time to put anything back. I slowed down. I didn't stop because in conditions like that, you don't stop on the line if you can help it. But I slowed enough to look. There was a reflective marker at the entrance, a single one on the right side, and I remember thinking that the tape on it looked wrong somehow. The color was off, not orange, not yellow. Something paler, like it had been in the sun for a long time. Except this is February in North Dakota, and nothing has been in the sun. I drove past. I told myself it was a private access I'd never noticed, because I'd never come through that section in a storm this bad before. I told myself one of the bigger farms had probably hired someone to keep their road open. There are operators in the county who'll do that as a side gig, and their work is not always to county standard. The pale marker, I told myself, was somebody's homemade replacement. The smoothness of the surface was the angle of my headlights. I finished the loop. I called in clear at the end of my shift. I went home, slept until 2 in the afternoon, ate a sandwich, and didn't think about it again for almost 3 weeks. The second time was a different storm on the same leg, but coming from the opposite direction. I want to be precise about this, because precision is one of the things that started slipping later. I was driving westbound, which means the opening should have been on my left this time, on the south side relative to my direction of travel, although it's the same physical opening either way. The storm was bad, maybe worse than the first one. I'd already reported one section as impassable and was rerouting back through the middle leg to get to the yard. The opening was there. Same place, same clean-banked entrance, same pale marker. This time, because I was going the other way and the wind was coming from a different angle, I could see further into it. Not far, maybe 40, 50 feet, but far enough to register that the surface continued straight, and that the snow blowing across it was behaving strangely. On the road I was on, the snow was coming in long, heavy waves, piling against the north side, scouring the south side. On the road in the opening, the snow was crossing it, but not landing. It moved across the surface like it was sliding on glass. There was no accumulation at all, even though the wind was the same wind. I sat there at idle for probably 10 seconds, which is a long time in a storm. Then I keyed the radio and asked dispatch if there was any private clearance work being done on the middle leg this season. I tried to make the question sound casual. The answer came back garbled, heavy static, more than the storm should have produced at that distance from the tower. I caught the word no and the word check, and not much else. I asked again. The static got worse. I let off the key and the static stopped, and through the windshield I could see the opening in the fence line as clearly as I could see anything in that weather. I drove on. I did not turn in. When I got back to the yard, I asked the dispatcher, an older woman named Lorraine, who has worked nights for the county longer than I've been alive, whether she'd heard me on the middle leg. She said she had. She said the static had been on my end, not hers, and that I should get the radio looked at. I asked her if there was any private operator clearing on that stretch. She looked at me for a second over the top of her glasses, the way she does when she's deciding how to answer something, and she said, "Not that I know of," and then she said, "You don't want to take any roads that aren't on your sheet out there, not in a storm like that. People get turned around." That was the first time anyone said anything to me about it, and even then she didn't say anything. She just told me to stay on my sheet, which is what dispatchers tell you anyway. I went home and I thought about it more than I wanted to. Over the next month, in the bad storms, I started watching for the opening. I want to be honest about that, because watching for it is not the same as ignoring it, and I knew that even at the time. I told myself I was being thorough. I told myself a good driver knows every feature of his route, and if there was a private access I hadn't cataloged, I should catalog it. But the truth is that I wanted to see it again, the way you want to confirm something you're not sure you saw the first time. It appeared 3 more times that month, always in heavy weather, always the same place, between the 3rd and 4th markers, past a particular grain bin on the north side of the road. A grain bin that's a useful landmark in clear weather and completely invisible in a whiteout. Always the clean banked entrance, always the pale marker, always the surface that the snow slid across without sticking. In clear weather, I drove out there on my own time twice, in daylight, in March, when most of the snow had crusted over and you could see the fence lines and the field edges plainly. There was no opening. There was no gate. The fence ran continuous along that stretch. The grain bin was where it should be. The field on the north side was an unbroken expanse of stubble under crusted snow, and there was no track, no post hole, no cut in the fence wire. Nothing. The first time I drove out and saw nothing, I felt relieved. The second time, I felt something closer to embarrassment. I started thinking about how many hours I'd been on the road that winter, how little sleep I'd been getting, how the cab heater had been running rough and giving me headaches. I started thinking about a guy I'd worked with on the gravel crew who had a small stroke at 41 and didn't know it for 3 days. I made an appointment with my doctor. He took my blood pressure, asked me about my sleep, said I was fine, and told me to drink less coffee. I drank less coffee for about a week. The next storm was at the end of March, which is normally when the season is winding down, but isn't always. A late system came through, heavy and wet, and we got called out on a Saturday night for what the forecast was calling, in the careful language they use when they don't want to commit, a significant event. By midnight, visibility was effectively 0. I was on the middle leg again, going east, taking it slow because the drifts had built up faster than we'd expected, and the blade was hitting hard pack under the powder. I was tired. I'd worked the night before, too. My hands were stiff inside my gloves, and I'd been wrapping them around the paper coffee cup at every chance I got, just to get some warmth into the joints. The radio came on with a call from Lorraine. There was a vehicle reported stranded, she said, somewhere on the middle leg or near it. The caller had been a woman on a cell phone with bad reception who said her husband had gone out to get her sister from a place I'm going to call the Vendel place, because that's not its real name, and the family deserves their privacy. The Vendel place was on a county road that connected to the middle leg, about 6 miles east of where I was. Her husband had left 2 hours earlier and hadn't come back, and his phone was going to voicemail. I told Lorraine I'd keep an eye out. She told me not to leave my route. She said it twice, which she doesn't usually do. I kept driving. The markers came and went. I counted them out of habit. 1, 2, 3. The grain bin was somewhere to my left in the dark, invisible. I started watching for the opening before I'd consciously decided to. It was there, wider this time. That's the part I keep going back to. The entrance was wider than it had been before, by enough that I noticed without having to think about it. The banked snow on either side was higher, cleaner, more recently cut. The pale marker was there on the right, and there was a second one further in, maybe 50 feet down, which I had never seen before, and past the second marker, far back in the dark where my headlights couldn't reach, there was a light. A small, steady light. Not blinking, not moving. The kind of light a porch bulb makes, or a yard light on a pole. The kind of light that says someone lives here and has left it on. I stopped the truck. I sat there with the blade down and the engine running, and I looked at that light for what felt like a long time and was probably less than a minute. The radio said my name, not Lorraine's voice, a man's voice, weak and far away, asking if the road had been cleared yet. He didn't say which road. He just said, "Has it been cleared yet?" And he said my first name, which is not something most people on the radio use. The county frequency uses truck numbers. I keyed the mic and asked him to identify. The static came up. I couldn't hear his answer if he gave one. I let off the key and the static stopped, and I could hear my own breathing in the cab, and the wind, and the engine, and nothing else. I want to tell you that I drove on, that I stayed on my sheet, the way Lorraine told me to, and finished my route and never thought about it again. I want to tell you that because it's the version of me I prefer. What I actually did was put the truck in gear and turn into the opening. Not far. I want to be clear about that. I didn't drive in deep. I went maybe 100 feet, slow, with the blade down, watching the markers on the right. The surface under the tires felt different, smoother, like Merle had said, less like asphalt and more like packed clay that had been worked over by a grater for a long time. The wind died down inside the opening, the way wind dies down when you drive into a shelter belt, except there were no trees on either side of me, just open field as far as I could see, which wasn't far. The light was still ahead. It didn't get closer. That's the part I noticed when I'd gone what I judged to be 100 feet. The light should have grown. It hadn't. It was the same size and the same brightness it had been from the entrance, which meant either it was much further away than I'd thought, or it was moving at exactly my speed, or distance wasn't working there the way it works on the roads I knew. I checked my odometer. I'd reset the trip meter at the yard, the way I always do, and I'd been tracking my mileage on the route sheet at each marker. By the count of markers I'd passed before turning in, I should have been at 23.4 miles. The trip meter said 26.1. I sat there looking at the numbers for a while. Then I looked at them again, and they said 23.4. I don't know which reading was the real one. I don't know if either was. I backed the truck out. I want to make this part plain, too. I didn't turn around inside the opening because I couldn't see well enough to be sure of the edges, and I didn't want to put a wheel into the field. I backed out the way I'd come in, slow, watching the side mirrors, until I felt the back tires hit the banked snow at the entrance and roll over it onto the county road. I straightened out and I drove east. The radio came back about 10 minutes later. Lorraine's voice, clean, no static. She said the stranded driver had been found. He'd taken a wrong turn in the storm, ended up at a farm 3 miles south of where he should have been, and had walked to the farmhouse. The family had given him coffee and called in. Everyone was fine. She said it the way she says everything, like a woman who has been giving good news and bad news in the same tone for 30 years. I asked her if he'd said anything about the road he'd taken. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "He said he saw a light and turned toward it, and the light wasn't where he thought it was." She said, "He's a little shook up. She said, "You're not the first person to ask me a question like that this winter." And she said it in a way that was not an invitation to continue the conversation. I finished my route. I called in clear at the yard. I sat in the truck with the engine off for maybe 20 minutes before I went inside, watching the snow come down on the windshield and melt against the warm glass and freeze again at the edges. When I went into the office to drop my route sheet, I looked at it under the light, the way you do when you want to make sure your handwriting is legible for the day crew. My check marks at each marker were there, my mileage notes were there, and between two of the lines, in pencil, in handwriting that looked like mine but slightly off, the way your handwriting looks when you've written something while half asleep, there was a note that said turned north at marker 14 returned. I had not written that. I had not turned north at marker 14. Marker 14 was the grain bin marker. The opening was on the north side. I had turned in there, gone 100 feet, and backed out. I had not written anything in pencil during the shift. I use a pen. The pencil was sitting in the cup on the dispatch counter, where it always sits. I stood there for a while, looking at that line. Then I took an eraser from the cup and I rubbed it out carefully until the paper was clean. I turned the sheet in. I went home. I have thought about that note a lot since then. I've thought about whether erasing it was the right thing to do. I've thought about whether someone else would have written it for me if I hadn't eventually written it myself. I've thought about Merle, who retired the year before I started, and who I only met twice, and who told me a road is not a place. I've talked to 2 other drivers about it, indirectly, not in so many words. You don't ask other drivers if they've seen a road that isn't there. You ask them if they've ever had trouble on a particular stretch in heavy weather. You ask them if they've ever had their odometer act up. You ask them if they've ever heard someone on the radio they couldn't identify. One of them, a man about 10 years older than me, said that every county has a stretch like that, and the trick was not to write anything down about it that the day crew would have to read. He didn't elaborate. The other one, a woman who has been driving for the county longer than I have, said that her first winter, an older driver had told her that some roads are roads people meant to take and didn't. She said she'd thought he was being poetic. She said she didn't think that anymore. She said she wouldn't tell me what to do about it, because nobody had told her, and she'd figured out her own way of handling it, which was to stay on her sheet and not look too hard at anything between the 3rd and 4th marker past the grain bin. I asked her if she'd seen it too. She said she had seen something. She said she didn't want to call it a road, because calling it a road meant agreeing it was one, and she wasn't ready to agree. I have not seen the opening since that night in March. We had a quiet end to the season, then a wet spring, then summer, then fall, and now we're back in winter again, and I've been watching for it on every bad night. So far it hasn't shown. The weather hasn't gotten bad enough, maybe. Or it has, and it just hasn't shown to me this year on this truck. I don't know what the road is. I want to be careful here, because I've had a long time to think about it, and I've come up with a lot of theories, and most of them sound stupid when I say them out loud. The least stupid one I have is this. When the visibility goes, the maps stop working, not metaphorically, practically. The maps describe a world you can see, and when you can't see, you're not in that world anymore. You're in a smaller world, made of the markers and the wind and what you remember of the route. And in that smaller world, there are things the maps don't cover, because the maps were never asked to cover them. Roads people started and didn't finish. Trips people meant to take. errands that got interrupted by weather and never got resumed, the husband who left to get his sister and turned toward a light, the driver who, 20 years ago, took a shortcut he wasn't supposed to take and didn't come home. Things that the official record closed without really closing, because the people involved never finished closing them themselves. I think the road is where those go. I don't think it's haunted, exactly. I don't think there's anything in it that wants to hurt me. I think it's a route in the same sense that the middle leg is a route, except the middle leg connects 2 points on a map, and that road connects something else. Intentions, maybe. Unfinished business. The space between meaning to do something and actually doing it. And I think when the storm gets bad enough, the road becomes available, the way a back hallway in a building becomes available when the main hallway is blocked. And I think the reason the older drivers won't write about it plainly is that writing about it plainly is one of the ways you start using it. You document a road, and the road starts being a road you take. The note in pencil, in my handwriting, the night I turned in, turned north at Markir 14, returned. I erased it. I'm grateful I noticed it in time to erase it. But I've thought, more than once, that the word returned in that note is the word that bothers me most. Because returned implies a completed trip. It implies that I went somewhere and came back, and I only went 100 feet. I keep driving. The work is the work. The roads still need clearing, and the school buses still need to run, and the home health nurses still need to get to the houses where they're expected. I check my route sheet before I leave the yard. I warm my hands on the coffee cup. I count the markers. I listen for the wind. When the storms come, I watch the north side of the middle leg between the third and the fourth marker past the grain bin, and so far I have not seen the opening this winter, and I don't know whether that means it isn't there, or whether it means it's waiting for a worse night than we've had yet. Last week, I cleaned out the bed of my truck, which I do every couple of months because things accumulate back there, sandbags and tarps and old chains. Under a tarp in the back corner, I found a road sign, a small one, the kind you'd see at the end of a private drive. It was the pale color of the markers I'd seen at the opening. There was no name on it, no number, no county designation, just a metal blank, weathered, with 2 bolt holes at the top where it would have been mounted on a post. I don't remember picking it up. I don't remember putting it in the truck. I asked the day crew if any of them had thrown it back there, and they said no, and they meant it, the way you can tell when somebody means a no. I took the sign out of the truck and I set it in the back of my garage, leaning against the wall behind the snowblower, where I don't have to look at it. I haven't decided what to do with it. I'm not going to throw it away, because throwing it away feels like the kind of decision the road would want me to make, and I'm trying not to make decisions the road would want me to make. I'm not going to mount it either, obviously. So it sits in the garage, and most days I forget it's there, and some days when the wind picks up, I remember. I started this by saying that Merle told me a road is not a place. I don't think he was being poetic. I think he was telling me, as plainly as he knew how, that the line we keep open through the snow is an agreement. The county agrees to clear it. The drivers agree to follow it. The maps agree to describe it. As long as everybody keeps their part of the agreement, the road is the road. When the storm gets bad enough that the agreement breaks down, the road becomes something else, and what it becomes is not always something you want to drive on, even if it looks better maintained than the one you're supposed to be on, especially then. I'm going out tonight. The forecast is calling for a significant event after midnight, the kind of language that means they don't want to commit. My route sheet is the same as it always is. My thermos is full. The heater in the cab has been worked on twice since last winter, and it almost works. I'll count the markers. I'll call in at the usual times. If the opening is there, I'll drive past it. I will not turn in. I've decided that, and I keep deciding it every time I think about it, because deciding it once doesn't seem to be enough. If somebody calls in stranded, I'll do what the job tells me to do, which is report it and stay on my route until dispatch sends somebody who can help. I won't follow a light. I won't trust a marker that isn't the right color. I won't write anything in pencil on my route sheet, ever, for any reason. And if I get back to the yard in the morning and my mileage doesn't match my markers, I'll write down the marker count and I'll leave the mileage blank, and I'll let the day crew assume the odometer cable froze up, the way odometer cables sometimes do in weather like this. That's the agreement I've made. It's not a good one. It's the one I have. The wind's been picking up since I started talking. I should get going. The plow doesn't drive itself, and the road, the real one, the one on the map, isn't going to stay open on its own.